instead of putting people's names in the computer like that was my normal job, the last 2 weeks of the campaign, because I wasn't sending out letters anymore, they brought me with a chair and a shredder. They sat me down in the big open area where the campaign office was and explained to me that I was going to be shredding documents for the campaign because I had to do something. I mean, I was already there. So they brought a box, like big box of letters, sat them down next to me and told me, run these through the shredder when the bag gets full, take it off, put it off to the side, here's another bag, so on and so forth. So I'm thinking, okay, that's fine, until I start looking at the letters. Most, if not all, the letters that I was shredding were in regards to those checks that I had to take to the war room because they were more than people were supposed to be able to donate. They had me shredding evidence that people had mailed checks. At that point, I realized quickly, you know what? It's always the little guy that gets sent to Leavenworth. Walkawayers. My name is Brook, and I have grown up in the South. To start off, I guess I should say I'm probably what you would call a combination of a walk with and a walkawayer, because my journey to walk away started way back in the late 90s / early thousands when I was studying for my first bachelor's degree. I was at one of my local colleges where I'd chosen to go to school from an early age, and I was studying journalism at the time. One of my instructors one day was teaching us about the quote-unquote Big Five. And that was the point that I learned that 93% of the world's news media outlets are owned by 5 companies. This was where I learned that you will never see anything that is not family-friendly on ABC because they are owned by Disney. This will come into play much later on after Hillary got the nomination. Anyway, during my time at the university, one of the requirements in my department was that you had to do an internship. Well, it just so happened that my internship was to take place in 2000. 2000, if you guys will recall, was the election where the Supreme Court eventually had to decide that George Bush won the election because it was too close to call. Well, my internship was with Al Gore's presidential campaign in 2000. I worked in the communications area, which is just a fancy word for saying that I worked in the mailroom. I was a hardcore Democrat at that time, of course, because I grew up in a family full of Democrats. My grandmother was into local politics here in the county that I now live as a school teacher. Because we lived in Tennessee, she worked pretty heavily with the Gore family. She actually received an invitation to the inauguration after Clinton was elected, which would have been really exciting if we could have gotten a hotel room, but anyway. So I went to work for Al Gore's campaign at the campaign headquarters in Nashville. So that was where I first got my insider's view on how politics works, because the DNC headquarters were there in the building where I was working. The first thing that I saw that just struck me as being odd was I would see members of the public come through the door right next to my office in the mailroom with stacks and stacks of Bush signs in their hands. And I couldn't figure out why. I mean, they would disappear around a corner and I was busy doing my work, so it didn't occur to me to ask where they were going or what they were doing. It just so happened that I found out from my supervisor one day. I kind of offhand mentioned seeing a guy come in with a stack like this of signs, and I said, why are we bringing Bush signs into the building? And she laughed. She said, oh, you don't know about the bonus program. And I said, what bonus program? And she said, we pay members of the public 25 cents a sign. And I was like, are you kidding? They're going into people's yards and taking their signs to bring them in to get paid? And she laughed and she said, yeah, I mean, we don't want people to know that there are people in Nashville that are voting for Bush. And I was like, that doesn't quite pass the smell test, shall we say. I mean, I was probably, let's see, I was 18 when I voted for Clinton the first time. So by that point in time, I had already voted for Clinton twice and was very excited at the prospect of being able to vote for Al Gore, because he would have been the third election that I had voted in by that point, because I spent 10 years studying for my first bachelor's degree. So I'm like nearing the very end at that point. So I'm kind of watching the way that the campaign is being run. I reached the point where I became so jaded working in the mailroom. My job in the mailroom was to open up letters, figure out what subject the person was writing about, and then we had little baskets scattered around the room for letters where we would take the envelope and staple it to the back of the letter if it had the person's return address on it. If you wrote a letter to Al Gore in 2000 and received a form letter, chances are good I was the person that put your name and address in the database to have a letter sent to you. So that was my job. Well, you can imagine, along with letters, people also mailed checks. And it was at that point that I learned, if the check is up to a certain amount, staple the check to the letter and put it in this basket over here. But if the check is over this amount, which of course I didn't realize was the limit to how much a person could write a check for to donate to a campaign, I was to take the check and the letter in hand to Al Gore's war room and pass it off to a member of their staff. I'll get more into that later on. But anyway, I reached the point where I did not watch the news anymore, because I knew every time we made a mistake, because we would get an influx of letters telling us exactly why we made a mistake. I tracked how well the campaign was doing from the number of letters that we got in my mailroom every week. So you can imagine, as the election progressed, it's getting closer to election time, they brought all of us in communications together and explained that after a certain day we wouldn't be sending out any more letters, because they wanted to make sure that the letters got to people before election day. Not an uncommon practice. But instead of putting people's names in the computer like that was my normal job, the last 2 weeks of the campaign, because I wasn't sending out letters anymore, they brought me with a chair and a shredder. They sat me down in the big open area where the campaign office was, and explained to me that I was going to be shredding documents for the campaign, because I had to do something. I mean, I was already there. So they brought a box, like big box of letters, sat them down next to me and told me, run these through the shredder when the bag gets full, take it off, put it off to the side, here's another bag, so on and so forth. So I'm thinking, okay, that's fine, until I start looking at the letters. Most, if not all, the letters that I was shredding were in regards to those checks that I had to take to the war room, because they were more than people were supposed to be able to donate. They had me shredding evidence that people had mailed checks. At that point, I realized quickly, you know what? It's always the little guy that gets sent to Leavenworth. And I'm just thinking, they just assume that I'm a stupid intern that's not going to know that I'm essentially being asked to cover up illegal activity. That was the first moment, the very first moment. The second was when Donna Brazil let all of us interns, people that were basically working for free because we were college students, that we were going to be required to work 40 hours a week in the weeks leading up to the election, or they would not sign off on our hours for college. I ended up being on school suspension for a year after that, because my grades fell through the floor, because I had to skip classes every day for like 2 weeks because of this. So yeah, no love lost, especially not now that she's on Fox. Anyway, skipping on ahead, that was when I learned, studying to be a member of the news media, we were trained to write articles at an 8th grade understanding level. That was my first time really realizing that the news media assumes that the people that they're writing for have a distinct lack of intelligence. I knew my family members, people that were hardcore Democrats, that deserved so much better than the way they were treated. But even then, I still continued to vote Democrat. I voted Democrat every election until 2016. My husband and I had been married for 12 years. He was with me. I mean, he had voted Democrat pretty much all his life up until the point that we moved back to Texas. My husband is originally from Texas, and in 2010, my husband and I moved from Tennessee all the way down to Texas. That was where I first started to really get into politics. So we were kind of watching, and I knew that I didn't like Hillary because of how badly she had treated the women that had accused her husband of sexual assault. I'm not talking about Monica. I'm talking about the others, the ones that Trump had at that press conference right after the Access Hollywood tape came out. So I knew that I couldn't vote for her because she used every ounce of political capital she had to bury those women, and then had the audacity to claim that she and the Democrats were the party of women. I was like, no. When I was working for Gore's campaign, I was very impressed with John McCain. Not a popular opinion at the campaign headquarters, as you can imagine, until he chose Sarah Palin for his running mate. And I knew the reason that he chose her was because he was trying to appeal to women. And that was the first time that I ever thought, I am not going to vote for you just because you chose a woman to be your running mate. I'm not going to vote for somebody just because she's a woman. She has to be qualified. She has to have views that I agree with. So when Hillary's entire campaign centered around the fact that it was her turn, and that she gave off the air of somebody that just believed that it was her turn. And I'm thinking to myself, you're going to have to give me more than just the fact that I should vote to not betray my gender. Something, of course, that I was told after the campaign and his election. So we were still living in Texas, preparing to move back to Tennessee when the primary happened in 2016. My husband voted for Marco Rubio. I voted for Bernie because I was still on the Democrat side, but knew that I couldn't stomach voting for her. So I voted for him because I liked a lot of his ideas, having not really a lot of understanding about how they would get paid for. That was my first mistake, but anyway. So after the primary, when Trump got the nomination, that was when the media completely lost their minds. But I think the true moment when I finally just said, you know what, never again, was when Hillary came out and called half of Trump supporters. She could put them in a basket of deplorables. And I'm thinking to myself, let's be real. You don't mean half of us. You mean all of us. All of us that didn't vote for you. All of us that disagree with you. All of us in the flyover states. One of my favorite videos to watch from election night is the Young Turks. Because it epitomizes the disdain that people have for people that come from states like mine. If you don't live on the coast or you're not part of the coastal elites, they have no use for you at all. I mean, I watch the news. Okay, I'll give you a good example. Something that I learned from studying for my degree in journalism. On Inauguration Day, first they had the pictures of the empty spaces where they claimed that nobody showed up for the inauguration, which I knew was a load of crap because one of my local organizations said that there were people turned away at the gate because there were so many people. So I knew that was a lie immediately. But then I watched them disparage Donald for when he and Melania came down in the car where they were supposed to meet with the Obamas for breakfast. They criticized Donald for jumping out of the car and leaving Melania behind. But the video that they shot cut off at a certain point. So I did some searching and I looked for the video that the rest of it, because I knew from the abruptness of the way they cut it off that there was something we weren't supposed to see. Sure enough, it's Donald rushing ahead while the driver opens the door for Melania so that he can run up and open the door for the Obamas in a sign of respect. They cut that part off of the video to show that he's a misogynist that leaves his wife behind. He's a racist. 2 of his wives are immigrants, for God's sake. You know, I grew up around Democrats. I always thought that the Republicans were the racists, until I learned after doing some research that the Republican Party was founded to eliminate slavery. That was the purpose for the entire Republican Party being founded in the first place. But then I started getting arguments from people that I worked with saying, yeah, but that was so long ago. And I'm like, well, how about the Voting Rights Act of 64? Is that close enough for you? And they were like, what do you mean? I said, the Democrats voted unanimously against that. Hillary praised Barry Goldwater and Margaret Sanger. I can't begin to tell you how shocked I was when I found the video of her talking about eliminating the numbers in the Black community. And then I started to think, all the Planned Parenthoods in the areas where I grew up are in the poor areas. Why do we think that is? Are we trying to get rid of people that we think are a drain on society? Are you kidding me? But sure, I'm the racist. Are you kidding? So there's that. There's the open disdain that the entire Democrat establishment has held, and the media, who I view as nothing more than a bunch of propagandists for the Democratic Party. So these are just some of the many reasons that I chose to walk away. I went from being an absolute vehement liberal all my life to taking that red pill in the fall of 2016. Unless they fix the links that they've fallen down, I will never vote Democrat again. 2016 was the first time that I had ever voted straight party all the way down. Before that, I was a person that would vote for the person, whether they were Republican or Democrat. I kind of tended to think of myself as a kind of a moderate. I have family, friends that have all turned their backs on me because they think that I am against gay people because I voted for Donald Trump. I believe that every person deserves the right to be happy and the right to have their voices heard. In fact, on election night, they scheduled me to close at the store that I was working at. When the returns started to come in, every person that I worked with at that store voted Democrat. I was like maybe one of maybe 3 people that didn't. I sat and held their hands when they cried, because I remember standing in the Legislative Plaza in Nashville when Gore lost until 2 in the morning, when he had his campaign manager come down to tell us to go home. So you can imagine when Hillary didn't address her supporters after the election, I was like, well, that looks familiar. Stop showing disdain for the people that give their blood, sweat, and tears to you. Stop trying to use every nasty trick that you can pull to accomplish your goals. Stop clinging to power with all your bony fingers. You have to recognize the people that put you there in the first place, and I don't think the Democratic Party at this point does that. I have found so much love and acceptance in this group. When I found your video, Brandon, it was a lifesaver. Thank you so much. #walkaway.
For more great videos, download the Walkaway Social app at walkawaysocial.com. Share your testimonial and join our community.